Corporal Herschel Williams presses himself flat against a shattered slab of volcanic rock, the flamethrower tank strapped to his back, hissing faintly with pressure. Ahead of him, no more than 60 yards across open, ash-grey ground, a line of Japanese pillboxes watches the American advance in silence. He cannot see the gun ports. He can only see where 4 Sherman tanks have already stopped, their treads jammed in the loose volcanic sand, useless now as anything but cover. Smoke curls from a burning Amtrak somewhere behind him. The air smells of cordite, diesel and sulphur rising up through the black sand itself, since Iwo Jima's beaches sit on top of active volcanic vents. 4 riflemen crouch near him, weapons trained on the firing slits, waiting for his signal. Williams checks the igniter on his flamethrower nozzle, exhales, and starts forward, alone across open ground towards a bunker line that has already stopped one entire Marine regiment in its tracks that morning. What happens across the next few minutes will be written into a Medal of Honor citation within the year, and it begins with a single man walking towards concrete and machine gun fire with nothing but fire of his own. By February 1945, the United States had been fighting its way across the Pacific for more than 3 years, and Iwo Jima represented something different from the islands that came before it. The island sits roughly 1,062 kilometers south of Tokyo, an 8 square mile mass of black volcanic ash shaped like a pork chop, and its 2 airfields made it strategically vital for American B-29 bombers returning damaged from raids on the Japanese home islands. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi commanded a garrison of approximately 21,000 Japanese soldiers, and rather than defend the beaches, he had ordered his men to dig in. Over the preceding months, they carved more than 18 kilometers of tunnels through the island's volcanic rock, connecting an estimated 1,500 fortified positions, including reinforced concrete pillboxes with walls up to 4 feet thick. Many bunkers had multiple firing apertures and interlocking fields of fire, so that knocking out one position simply exposed the attacker to 2 others. The 5th Amphibious Corps, made up of the 3rd, 4th and 5th Marine Divisions, landed on the 19th of February 1945 with roughly 30,000 men in the first assault waves. Naval and air bombardment beforehand had done remarkably little damage to a defence system built largely underground. Within the first day, Marine casualties climbed past 2,400. By 23rd February, the 4th day of fighting, the flag had gone up on Mount Suribachi at the island's southern tip, but the real battle for the airfields to the north was only beginning, and it was a battle fought bunker by bunker, yard by yard, often by single men crawling forward with satchel charges, grenades and flamethrowers strapped to their backs. That morning, near Airfield Number 1, Williams' company had already lost momentum. Japanese fire from a cluster of pillboxes had pinned down the advance for over an hour, and several Sherman tanks sent forward to support the infantry had become stuck in the soft ash, unable to maneuver close enough to bring their guns to bear. Williams, a 21-year-old from Quiet Dell, West Virginia, had trained on the M2-2 flamethrower, a weapon that carried roughly 70 pounds of fuel and compressed nitrogen and projected a stream of burning napalm-thickened fuel some 20 to 40 yards. His commanding officer asked if he could do anything about the bunkers. Williams said he would try. 4 riflemen, Privates Charles Fisher, Vernon Waters, James Robeson, and Chick Robeson, moved forward with him not to fight the bunkers directly, but to keep Japanese riflemen off him while he closed the distance, since a man carrying 2 fuel tanks on his back made an unmissable target the moment he stood upright. Williams moved in short bursts, dropping into shell craters and dead ground, reading the terrain the way infantry had learned to on this island, where every fold in the ash could mean the difference between cover and exposure. He reached the first pillbox from the blind side, climbed onto its roof where the firing slit could not reach him, and fired a burst of flame directly down through the air vent. The screaming inside stopped within seconds. He moved to the second position, closer now, and this time approached from an angle the defenders had not anticipated, sending a jet of fire straight through the firing aperture itself. Marines further back watched a single man's silence. In the space of little over a minute, 2 positions that had held up an entire company. He returned to his own lines, strapped on a fresh set of tanks, and went out again. Over roughly 4 hours that morning, Williams made repeated trips back to resupply, going through 6 flamethrower units in total, each refill meaning another exposed walk across open ground under fire to collect a fresh weapon before starting forward once more. At one point, when Japanese riflemen emerged from a trench to fire on him directly, Williams turned the flamethrower on them at close range rather than retreating. Corporal Robeson later described covering him from a shell hole no more than 15 yards from an active pillbox, close enough that fragments of concrete struck their position when Williams's flame ignited stored ammunition inside. If this kind of close detail history is something you enjoy, a quick subscribe helps more than you might think. The tactical picture at Airfield No. 1 shifted through that single morning in ways that rippled outward for days afterward. Before Williams' action, the regiment's advance across that stretch of ground had effectively stalled, with casualties mounting for every yard gained. Marine after-action reports from the sector describe a gap of roughly 300 yards that had been impassable under interlocking fire from at least 7 positions. By early afternoon, several of those positions had been eliminated, allowing following units and, crucially, the stalled Shermans to move forward and consolidate the advance. This was not unique to Williams alone. Across Iwo Jima that week, flamethrower operators from Army and Marine units together burned through an estimated 20,000 gallons of thickened fuel-clearing bunkers the same way, 1 position at a time. The Japanese defense, designed for a fight to the death rather than a fighting withdrawal, meant almost no position ever surrendered. Of the roughly 21,000 defenders on the island, historians estimate fewer than 1,000 were taken prisoner, with most of the rest killed in place, often inside the very bunkers and tunnels they had spent months constructing. American losses mounted in parallel. By the time the island was declared secure on March 26, 1945, US forces had suffered around 26,000 casualties, including roughly 6,800 killed, making Iwo Jima one of the costliest battles in Marine Corps history relative to the number of men engaged. The flamethrower units, small in number, absorbed disproportionate risk. Operators like Williams typically survived only a handful of assaults before becoming casualties themselves, since the sight of a man carrying fuel tanks made him a priority target for every rifleman and machine gunner who could see him. For the infantrymen following behind, the experience of that morning looked very different from Williams's solitary advances. Marines from his own company describe moving forward in short rushes once a pillbox fell silent, then immediately taking up positions to prevent Japanese defenders from reoccupying a bunker through connecting tunnels, something that happened elsewhere on the island more than once. For Japanese defenders inside the network, the arrival of flame at a firing slit or ventilation shaft offered almost no possibility of escape, since many positions had only one entrance, deliberately built that way to force any assault directly into a defended kill zone. Naval gunfire liaison teams offshore, meanwhile, continued adjusting fire onto targets identified by forward observers, though by this stage of the fighting they had learned that shell fire alone rarely penetrated the thickest bunkers, which is precisely why infantry carried flame and demolition charges had become the primary tool for reducing them. Medical corpsmen worked close behind the advancing line throughout, and casualty evacuation from this stretch of ground remained difficult through the day, because the terrain offered so little cover for stretcher parties moving back towards the beach. The turning point that morning was not a single dramatic reversal, but a measurable mechanical one. Bunkers that had killed and wounded Marines for over an hour began, one after another, to fall silent. Commanders on the ground made the decision to commit the freed up Shermans forward once the immediate threat from the pillbox line had been removed, something that would have been suicidal an hour earlier. Williams's own account, given decades later, was notably unsentimental about the experience, describing it mainly in terms of what needed doing next, rather than any sense of heroism in the moment. What changed permanently, at least for that sector of the front, was the tactical approach for the following days. Commanders increasingly paired flamethrower teams with close infantry protection as standard practice rather than improvisation, since the results near Airfield No. 1 had demonstrated how effective and how costly the combination could be. In the days that followed, the airfield came fully under American control, and engineers began repairing the runways, even as fighting continued elsewhere on the island. Williams was recommended for the Medal of Honor by his battalion commander within weeks of the action. He received it from President Harry Truman at the White House on October 5, 1945. One of 27 Marines and sailors awarded the medal for actions on Iwo Jima, the largest number given for a single battle in American history. Williams remained in the Marine Corps Reserve, eventually retiring as a Chief Warrant Officer, and went on to work for decades with the Veterans Administration, helping other disabled veterans navigate benefit systems. In 1995, he was invited to lay a wreath at the base of the Marine Corps War Memorial. He later established the Woody Williams Foundation, which built memorials across the United States honoring Gold Star families, those who had lost a family member in military service. He died on June 29, 2022, at the age of 98, the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from the Second World War, and was laid in state at the United States Capitol. An honor rarely extended to anyone outside the presidency. In 2020, the US Navy commissioned an expeditionary sea base named USS Herschel Woody Williams, carrying his name into active service decades after that morning on the Ash. Stand again on that stretch of ground near Airfield No. 1, and the runways are long gone, replaced now by scrub grass and the same black volcanic sand that swallowed men's boots in 1945. Williams himself returned to Iwo Jima only rarely in later life, and when asked about that morning, he tended to speak of the 4 riflemen who kept him alive rather than of the bunkers he burned open. He carried 70 pounds of fuel across open ground 6 separate times so that other men could move forward, and for the rest of his 98 years he insisted that the medal belonged as much to Fisher, Waters and both Robesons as it did to him. The bunker line that stopped a regiment for an hour fell, position by position, to one man willing to walk towards it. That is the story the citation tells. It is also, in the end, simply what happened.